Friedrich Nietzsche.
Friedrich Nietzsche?
Who is Friedrich Nietzsche?
Poet, philosopher, theologist, cultural critic, existentialist, extraordinarily pessimistic, madman, absolutely brilliant yet troubled mind of the 19th century. These adjectives do well to describe none other than the likes of Friedrich Nietzsche. Hello and welcome. My name is Christina Abruzzese, and today I'd like to discuss Nietzsche with you in relation to what I believe to be his conception of a leader, or in his words, an Übermensch. But first I'd like to take you on a very brief journey into Nietzsche's background and his descent into madness. Many of you will be familiar with Nietzsche being most associated with nihilism. This man raises questions that encourage us to seek the truth in what we perceive to be reality. Nietzsche asks, do we live in a world void of meaning, truth, or purpose? He is often regarded as depressing, radical, sexist, and anti-Christian. Although I would agree with this description, there are still valuable seeds of knowledge that we can take from Nietzsche and apply to our personal modern philosophy. Nietzsche was born in the year 1844 to religious pastors in what was then known as Prussia. After losing his father at an early age, he found himself surrounded by mainly women. Encompassed by a life of education and theology, it is no surprise Nietzsche chose to pursue religious and philological higher studies. The year 1865 transformed Nietzsche's views and planted the seeds of anti-Christian belief and encouraged his intrinsic and lifelong search for truth. His work and his writings didn't gain much traction until the 20th century, after his death. It was rumored that he had gone mad 11 or so years before his death due to syphilis he had apparently contracted from a brothel years before. Nietzsche's insights and philosophies, as outlined in his writings, would go on to shape and influence countless modern academics and current thoughts. Now, what does Nietzsche think about leadership? For us to understand, we have to take a closer look at some of his famous pieces. All of Nietzsche's writings contain information that allude to the way he viewed life, humanity, and qualities that make a great man, or in our case, a leader. One of his first famous pieces of literature was called The Birth of the Tragedy, which was published in 1872. This is his first attempt at self-criticism, and it was birthed in the form of speculation around forces that arose in ancient Greece. Nietzsche claims that Greek tragedy grew with the introduction of the Apollonian world. These views mixed with the Dionysian, which is another way of saying pursuing moral, social responsibility rather than following one's primal individual instincts. He believes there is a constant battle between the two. He now explains that consciousness has two sides, which is a tragic human condition, and it's an internal battle that we all identify with. To lead a rational life or one of delusions. Similar to the ancient Greeks, this writing suggests that our modern life is also subject to this split and tragedy. Tragedy for Nietzsche is being subject to fate and catastrophes during our existence and having to overcome them. Eventually, Nietzsche would side with Dionysian beliefs, which is to be loyal to oneself and personal instincts. He encourages embracing passion and emotion, as to suppress one's desire or impulses would only create psychological problems. In this case, a great man in Nietzsche's view will be one who can embrace their primal urges and, instead of acting on them, redirecting that energy towards higher, more culturally acceptable activities. Now, what does this have to do with being a leader? A leader is just a human and is also subject to the internal conflicts and tragedy the world is exposed to, which leads us to Human, All Too Human, which was published in 1878. Now, this work of Nietzsche's attempts to develop a greater understanding of human behavior. This writing contains a collection of essays that Nietzsche uses to break down and question the morality of the reader. He urges us to rethink and re-examine our beliefs in search of truth and freedom. Following this conversation of ethics, Nietzsche asserts that all of man's creations and societal constructs, such as marriage, career, and families, are actually meaningless. Nietzsche believes that a man will only be successful if they can come to terms with the tragedy of our existence, when man derives at the conclusion that life has no meaning. Here Nietzsche speaks of the individual's internal character, contributing to becoming a great man, or again in our case, a leader. In addition to accepting our lives to being meaningless, Nietzsche continues, the great man of the masses must have the impression that a mighty, indeed invincible, strength of will is present. At least it must seem to be there. Everyone admires a strong will because no one has it. This statement in Human, All Too Human explains that willpower and perceived greatness is still just a false construct, but a leader will be able to use this following influence and strength to appear as a great man. To Nietzsche, this is because the later men, or somebody who is a follower, are not always willing to accept what they do not know. Therefore, a leader must be able to put on what we would call a poker face, as to not scare the masses. Continuing on his search for truth, Nietzsche oozes anti-theism within his writing, The Gay Science. In 1882, this shocking writing in which Nietzsche proclaims that God is dead. God may be dead to Nietzsche, but the illusions and the moral constructs generated from religion are still alive and well today. More importantly, though, here he introduces the will to power, a fundamental and irrational force of nature that drives and motivates human behavior. The construction of a new morality will be superior to the old if she calls. According to Nietzsche, new men, supermen. This new morality is precisely the will to power. Nietzsche believes that through arts and self-reflection, one can calm their will, or that sense to dominate and control, which in turn will reduce the individual's suffering. In aphorism 13 of The Gay Science, entitled The Theory of the Sense of Power, Nietzsche writes, "Doing good and being kind to those who are in any way already dependent on us, that is, who are accustomed to think of us as the raison d'etre, we want to increase their power, because we thus increase our own." Nietzsche is basically saying here that being cruel towards others signifies a lack of power. Therefore, we can infer that a good leader or a good man is one that displays kindness. Continuing further, Thus Spoke Zarathustra was published in 1883. This writing of Nietzsche's elaborates on his concept of the Übermensch, which is a quite literal translation for superman. Introduced in Zarathustra, Nietzsche conceived that man should be more than just all too human. What he means by more than human is that a superman must contain sacrificing qualities and be willing to give up his personal comforts for the betterment of the whole. This is in direct contrast with the last man, of whom is only concerned with his individual comforts. In order to become a superman, one must overcome the self and the constraints placed on us by life. The will to power is a more fundamental human motivation, whereas our perception of truth is just an expression of our power. Power takes physical, economic, and political form, but Nietzsche cares more about the structure of power sculpting people's values. The process of transcending is a reevaluation of our values to become an Übermensch or superman. Nietzsche believes overcoming the self will allow individuals to alter the habitual values that stem from society. Accepting a lack of meaning in life allows Übermensch to live life in the present, rather than overthinking and stressing out over past and future events. Nietzsche directs a whole lot of attention to what the conditions of great individuals may be, and most notably in Beyond Good and Evil. In Beyond Good and Evil, he elaborates, the ideal of the most high-spirited, vital, world-affirming individual who has learned not to just accept and go along with what was and is, but who wants it again and again, just as it was and is through all eternity. This quote, as previously discussed, touches on a superman that lives in the present moment, rather than harping over the stresses of the past and the future. This is the need to break from an eternal recurrence. This writing discusses a type of duality between good and evil, as mentioned earlier. You need the two to have a contrast. Nietzsche proposes that we should be reanalyzing our moral biases. Additionally, in this writing, he again brings up the will to power. In regards to the will to power, Nietzsche summarizes this concept in his work. Here, one must think profoundly, to the very basis, and resist all sentimental weakness. Life itself is essentially appropriation, injury, conquest of the strange and weak, suppression, severity, obtrusion of peculiar forms, incorporation, and at the least putting it mildest, exploitation. But why should one forever use precisely these words, on which for ages a disparaging purpose has been stamped? Even the organization, within which, as was previously supposed, the individuals treat each other as equals. It takes place in every healthy aristocracy. Must itself, if it be a living and not a dying organization, do all that towards other bodies, which the individuals within it refrain from doing to each other. It will have to be the incarnated will to power. It will endeavor to grow, to gain around, attract to itself, and acquire ascendancy not owing to any morality or immorality, but because it lives, and because life is precisely the will to power. From within the few of Nietzsche's writings mentioned earlier, we can infer what he would believe to have been a good leader. To conclude this video, Nietzsche's philosophy makes reference to a type of person that he labels as quite literally a superman. To us, we will label this person a leader. From his point of view, humans are not inherently equal, and it takes a special type of person to encompass the qualities of an Übermensch. Men are not equal, nor shall they become equal. What would my love of the Overman be if I spoke otherwise? To Nietzsche, a leader is one of heroic acts, who has spent a great deal of time overcoming the self. A leader will be in equilibrium with their natural emotions and be able to overcome traditional values and customs. A leader will be kind, as it is easier to do so than to be cruel. A leader will be able to question cultural values and societal constraints, maintain their own values, and express them in an inspirational way. A Superman will display justice and compassion. In Zarathustra, Nietzsche aims to bring an end to old worldviews, unproven belief systems, and the reevaluation of the concept of morality. In order to become a Superman or a leader, one must endure the tragedies of life and embrace them, understand their moral consciousness, and question their biases. Additionally, and finally, a leader will display virtues which act to embetter others rather than the self within one's will to power. Thank you for listening to how the philosophies of Friedrich Nietzsche relates to the conception of leadership in modern day. My name is Christina Abruzzese, and that was The Nature of Nietzsche.